Transmitter device activated. Coordinates set for Earth 2.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Earth 2 podcast, your weekly exploration of the DC Comics multiverse and the legacy of their Golden Age characters through the Silver and the Bronze Ages of comics. I'm Peter Watson.
And I'm David Steele. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. It's another slight sidestep flashback this week. I think it's fair to say it acts as a nice little curtain raiser teaser for next week, would you say?
Certainly does, yes. I wholeheartedly concur.
Yes. Long time ago, listeners, Peter did a huge amount of research and made a big list of every story that had the word dimension in the title. Purely for instances such as this, when we have a couple of big episodes coming up and we need a little shorter one just to kind of help us catch our breath, which is why we did the Batman story last week as well, obviously. But today, for your delight, we are bringing you a story from issue 74 of Strange Adventures, published on the 25th of September 1956. And Peter is going to tell us all about the cover.
We've got the Superman DC National Comics logo in the top left. There's a banner at the top saying, "In this issue, details and entry blank for Giant 5,000 Prize Contest." So I think that might have expired by now, I'll be honest.
Possibly, but it's worth pointing out that Giant $5,000 prize contests supported menswear at the LA2 in London, but we could probably talk about that on our menswear podcast.
And they were probably also approved by the Comics Code Authority, just like this comic. Strange Adventures, featuring the Invisible Invader from Dimension X. Now, we're at an optician's. There's a man who is wearing a pair of glasses, who's looking at an eye chart. There's an optician behind him. There's a big diagram of an eye on the back wall, pointing at all the different parts. And as he's staring at this eye chart, there seems to be a ghostly figure walking towards him with a gun drawn. He looks very much like an evil version of Adam Strange.
He does.
He's got the cross bandoliers, for lack of a better expression, across his chest. He's got holsters, and he's got a gun in his hand. He's a fin in his head. He's got the kind of exact same cowl as Adam Strange as well. And this man has got one hand over one eye, as you do at the opticians. And he's saying, "Doctor, I can't see the eye chart. There's a strange creature standing in front of it."
Gosh. I'm actually long overdue. I always am, my contact lens and eye test check-up, but it's so difficult to know when you're going to be able to make an appointment and such like. Yeah, it's a very dynamic cover. I like it a lot. As someone who is chronically short-sighted and has been for a very long time, it's nice to see representation of going to the opticians in a comic cover.
Yes, me too, I agree. I've recently been to opticians and got myself a lovely couple of pairs of Clark Kents, yes.
There we go then. So we're going to leap straight into this nice short story. Peter is playing the man who is getting his eyes tested, who narrates the story, so Pete's probably going to do most of the talking this week, which is nice.
For a change.
Yes. Given how much talking I've had to do in recent weeks, this is a good thing. So, I'm reading from my copy of Showcase Presents Strange Adventures Volume 2, which Steve sent me for my birthday a couple of years ago. Very helpfully, Strange Adventures 74 is the first comic to be reprinted in it, so Steve's foresight there is astonishing. That's our pal Steve Higgins, obviously. Hi, Steve, if you're listening. I hope you are. So, without any further ado, opening splash page has a big caption at the top telling us the name of the story, and the story is called
The Invisible Invader from Dimension X.
And we see our hero, with his curly dark hair, addressing the camera, quite frankly, and he's saying,
"I'm Fred Garrett. I write science fiction, yarns about things that never really happen. People often ask me where I get my fantastic ideas. The answer is everywhere. Newspapers, books, science magazines, and now I can add one more source to my list. My own life."
And the rest of the page is taken up with an image, quite a startling image. On so many levels, I'm glad that we're talking about this story, because there's some very interesting comparisons. Fred can be seen, but he's translucent. He's wearing a sort of checked jacket and a tie, a pair of trousers and all that, and he's standing on a very sort of desert-style landscape, but the sky behind him is yellow. The moon in the sky is a very pale blue, so take a very pale blue drink.
Romulan ale.
Yes. We can see what looks like some kind of building or installation behind him, but Fred is facing three men who, to be honest, they all look like versions of the Ted Knight Starman here.
Yes.
Open face, but they have these sort of cowls with fins on the top, and as Pete described, the costume's very like Adam Strange, with his green with a sort of cross harness over the chest, and they've all got guns, which they're pointing at him. Fred is also carrying 2 guns, and he seems to be shooting a gun out of the hand of one of the men who looks like a cross between Adam Strange and Ted Knight Starman in painted green. And one of the Ted Knight Adam Strange lookalikes is saying, "Look, that weapon, firing at us by itself." Because what they can see is Fred's gun floating in midair, but of course they can't see Fred. And Fred is thinking,
Great stars! If what these creatures are saying is true, I'm invisible in this strange dimension of theirs.
awesome. Right, well now we've got that hideously complicated splash page out of the way, we can start with the story properly. First panel of page 2, Fred's narration begins.
One day, in search of an idea for a story to write, I was going over some news accounts.
Yes, we see Fred in what looks like a busy office, reading a newspaper headline. We can see a poster on the wall in the background which clearly says Strange Adventures, so that's quite interesting. Bear that in mind. Fred is looking a bit downcast as he looks at the newspaper, and he's saying,
Here's an odd story in today's paper. A couple of workers at a secret government arms plant insist that they saw some special weapons moving out of the factory without anyone carrying them. By the time the workers recovered from their surprise, the weapons had completely disappeared. Now I ought to be able to get a good science fiction story out of a juicy item like that. Soon I began to bang out a yarn, but before long...
Yes, we see Fred at his desk, typewriter in front of him, a couple more what look like maybe actually covers to Strange Adventures pinned on the wall behind him, but he's obviously feeling a bit weary because he's rubbing his forehead with the back of his hand and he's saying,
The print is blurring before my eyes. I can hardly make out my own writing. Maybe I need glasses. I'd better go for an eye examination. Soon after...
Fred has arrived at the optician's. His optician is very, very smart. He kind of looks like Errol Flynn, doesn't he, Peter?
Yes, definitely, huh?
We can tell it's an optician's because there's an eye chart on the wall, and there's a large drawing of an eye, which appears to be watching them, pinned to the wall as well. The optician is handing Fred a pair of glasses, and he's saying, Your glasses are all ready, Mr. Garrett. Here, put them on, and we'll see how they suit you.
Then, as I fitted on the glasses...
Please read this 5th line of the chart, Mr. Garrett.
Huh?
Says Fred, startled, because we then see an image very like the cover to this issue of Strange Adventures. Fred is looking in the direction of the eye chart, but he seems to obviously be hesitating because the optician is saying, Can't you see the 5th line?
I can't even see the chart, Doctor. There's someone standing in front of it.
Yes, it's the sort of phantom Adam Strange Ted Knight look-alike.
With a sudden impulse, I handed the glasses to the doctor. Here, you look through them.
And we see Fred's point of view through the frame of the glasses, through the lens, and we can see the phantom Adam Strange Starman look-alike, but the optician says, What do you mean? What's wrong?
With my science fiction ear's mind, I assumed that I saw the strange creature on account of the glasses, but...
I don't see anything unusual. What are you trying to show me, Mr. Garrett?
Let me have those glasses again, please. I put them on, and at once the creature was visible again.
Very helpfully, Fred thinks to himself here.
There it is, disappearing through the wall, but why couldn't the doctor see it? And if it is real, what is it?
And indeed, see the creature phasing through the wall in a Kitty Pryde style. Very interesting.
I told the doctor everything, and he gave me the benefit of his experience.
Yes, we see the optician pointing it looks like is he pointing a finger at Fred? Yes, he is. And he's saying, Just as no two people have identical fingerprints, no two have the same vision. Maybe you did see something through these glasses that I can't see and that perhaps no one else can see.
I took my glasses and left. My curiosity was on fire, and yet I was apprehensive.
Yes, we see Fred out on the busy city street, fiddling with the frames of his specs, and he's thinking,
Why are these invisible creatures stalking through our city? What if they are a menace? I'll get no answers until I put on these glasses again. This time, as I peered through the glasses, I stood rooted to the ground, dumbfounded.
Yes, we kind of look over Fred's shoulder, and helpfully, once again, he thinks,
Great stars! Now I see more of them, walking right through solid objects, and each one is carrying something.
Yes, we see 3 more phantom Starman Adam Strangers walking around. It looks like they've got boxes under their arm. Maybe they're doing a Christmas shopping. Fred gets a dramatic close-up as he thinks.
I conquered my feeling of fear and came to a decision. They all seem to be heading in a certain direction. I'll follow them, try to find out who they are, what they're up to.
A slow dissolve takes us to the top of page 4.
Next to the city, there was an arms plant. I followed the creatures there.
Yes, and again, we're looking, it's a nice way of doing it, over Fred's shoulder as he sees this installation and some more of these figures walking around. And Fred is thinking,
They're stealing arms and ammunition, just as in that news item I read. They're invisible to everyone but me, and that makes it easy for them to get in and out. I had to find out where they were taking the weapons. I trailed them back through the city, to a lonely spot in a wood.
I wonder if this lonely spot in the wood has a dimensional portal which will lead him through to... Is it a bit marshy, is it a bit swampy? Have there been reports of houses sinking into the ground as well? But we see Fred in silhouette. We should probably mention, this was drawn by Carmine Infantino, wasn't it?
Yes, it was indeed.
Written by John Broome.
Mm-hmm.
It's very Carmine and it's gorgeous. So we see Fred's silhouette in this nice little foresty area, and he can see some more of the Phantom, Adam Strange, Ted Knight guys walking around in front of him, carrying their boxes. It looks as if they're walking into, well, very helpfully, Fred thinks to himself,
going into that strange-looking cave. Queer. I can see the mouth of the cave, but I can't see anything but a wavering blackness inside. Where does it lead to? I've got to find out. At this point, I hesitated. If I disappeared, who on earth would ever know what had become of me? But I had gone too far to stop now. I moved forward.
Yes, and we're guessing that Fred has gone into the cave because all around him it's complete blackness. He's got his glasses on, still wearing them, obviously. And I was kind of reminded of Matt Murdock in this panel.
Very much so, yes.
You can imagine this being some kind of representative Daredevil panel to show that he can't see or whatever. But as he moves into the darkness of the cave, Fred thinks to himself,
I can't see a thing, either before me or behind. All of a sudden, all light, all sound has vanished. The next moment, my body started to vibrate, and I blacked out. When I recovered my senses...
And Fred is definitely somewhere else. He thinks to himself,
I'm in a different world. A strangely coloured sky and sun.
Ah, so maybe it was the sun that we saw in the opening panel. Maybe it wasn't a blue moon. It looks like the sun is blue, and the sky is this weird sort of orange, and the ground in front of him is a sort of muddy brown. And in the distance, we see a very futuristic-looking city, which is coloured pink. But more interestingly than that, approaching Fred are a couple of the weapons-stealing invaders, and we can see very clearly that their uniforms are covered green, and the cross sort of harness is coloured white. They're approaching. Fred's narration for panel 5.
My science fiction background helped me piece things together.
And Fred thinks to himself, spelling it all out for us thickies.
I'm in a different dimension. That cave mouth must be a link between our Earth dimension and this one. But those creatures coming at me.
Yes, 2 of the other dimensional beings who we've been seeing, the ones dressed in green looking like Adam Strange and Ted Knight, are approaching with guns. Fred's narration for the final panel of page 4.
To my amazement, the creatures ran right through me without a sign of awareness of my being there.
So in this other dimension, Fred seems to have been stripped of all colour. He's just rendered as a black and white drawing, effectively. And as we see, the 2 other dimensional chaps run straight past him, and they seem to be hunting, indeed, a sort of weird-looking green dog type thing, with a big long snout and webbed feet and a long jaggedy tail and wide ears, and it shouts, "Yay, yay!" as it runs away. And I hope no animals were harmed in the making of this story. And at all this, Fred thinks,
they don't see me. They weren't coming at me, but at that wild animal they're hunting.
See, that takes us to the top of page 5.
Little by little, the full truth dawned on me.
Yeah, Fred has walked all the way into the alien city now. We can see him parading around casually with a hand in his pocket, which is quite amusing. And we see all the other dimensional lads and lassies walking about, minding their own business. They're all dressed in green, and a few of them are carrying things under their arm. But Fred looks around and he thinks,
I'm invisible. What an eerie feeling. I can go anywhere, watch anything, without anyone suspecting my presence.
This panel's quite charming, actually. We see Fred looking like a tourist on a Mediterranean holiday, walking down a nice cobbled street, type effect, crazy paving sort of thing going on. His narration reads, and then he thinks,
I couldn't explain why I became invisible, but one thing seemed likely. Whatever the cause of my invisibility is, the same force makes these creatures invisible in our world. But why do they steal arms from us? I spent days in the new dimension, learned their language, and discovered plenty.
Yes, we see poor Fred, still translucent and invisible, and I hope that he managed to get something to eat while he was there. Maybe he went back and forth, I don't know. But he's observing some of the chaps in the Ted Knight Adam Strange headgear walking around, and he's thinking to himself,
they have a democratic government here, and the creatures who stole our most deadly weapons are trying to overthrow it and set up a dictatorship.
Oh my goodness!
In fact, a secret date had been set for the uprising. I attended the secret meeting where it was decided on.
Yes, we see a group of the men wearing the Ted Knight style headgear. There's one older man, thicker set, bit of a belly with a moustache, who's addressing this group. Fred hovering in the corner, unseen by the other dimensional lads, of course, and their leader is addressing them, and he's saying, by nightfall, General Wyack will be dictator. Fred thinks,
I've got to inform the democratic leaders of the rebels' plan to overthrow the government. I sped from the meeting to the president's office, and there...
Yes, this is so Carmine it hurts. This is beautifully rendered. Nice panelled floor, very modern windows, long curtains. And we see the president sat behind his desk. There's a couple of attendees beside him, and they're looking, to our point of view, to the right of the panel, where very suddenly something odd is happening. The president points and says, "Look! Writing appearing on that wall!" And Fred, as he scribbles away, thinks,
I'm telling them about the conspiracy.
Quite right, Fred. It'd be quite odd if you were giving them a recipe or telling them how to make soup or something. Anyway, Fred's narration for the final panel, page 5.
Thanks to my warning, an investigation was made, and before noon, General Wyek received visitors.
Yes, we see the general sat in his own room, again looking like a very badly sketched version of Ted Knight. It's really, really quite amusing how much he looks like him. More so in black and white when you don't have the green colouring to deal with, but he looks up as a couple of very smart men bearing guns have walked in on him, and the general says, "Government police?" And one of these new arrivals says, "Come with us, General. You are under arrest." We arrive at the top of page 6.
There was still resistance. The stolen earth weapons had been cached in a secret arsenal where the conspirators held out.
Yes, we see a couple of members of the government police hiding behind a low wall, exchanging shots with the bad guys, with the rebels who are inside this building that we can see Fred running towards. Fred is thinking,
I must get into that building and stop this war single-handed. Invisible, I got in easily enough, and moments later...
Yes, and now we're in a weird indoor version of what happened in the opening splash image. We see Fred standing, and he has a gun in each hand. It's a good thing he got glasses.
Yes.
There's a dead shot. And he's firing each gun simultaneously and shooting the guns out of the hands of the rebels. And as he's doing this, Fred is thinking,
They can't see me. Only these guns.
One of the rebels is saying to his pals, "Weapons attacking us by themselves?"
My action stunned the last of the conspirators and forced them out of the arsenal.
We see the conspirators, the rebels, walking out of the building with their hands in the air. Government police watching. One of the rebels saying, "We surrender! Save us from the avenging guns!" And one of the government lads in the foreground thinks to himself in a very surprised way, "Avenging guns? A slow dissolve."
Later, I managed to make contact with the president, and I made everything clear to him and his people. Shortly afterward...
Yes, we see Fred, still invisible, but talking to the president. The president is handing him something and saying, "We cannot make a statue of you, Garrett, because none of us has ever seen you, but we can award you our highest medal for valor." And that's what it is. It's a nice spiky, fancy medal which Fred is taking in his right hand, and Fred thinks,
Gosh, a medal from another dimension. By agreement between me and the president, the hill where the opening was between our two worlds was blown up right after I returned through it back to my dimension.
We see Fred again in silhouette back by the tree, some distance from the cave. There's a nice burst of red and yellow and a
pow
as the explosion takes place, and Fred thinks,
It's better this way. Now tons of earth covering the opening, which must have been accidentally caused by a giant lightning flash.
And for the final panel, we're back at Fred's place as his narration reads,
When I got home, I sat down at my typewriter.
Yes, and we see the couple of Strange Adventures covers on the wall behind, and Fred with his new specs, typing away, thinking to himself,
I won't write the imaginary story I had originally plotted on the mysteriously moving weapons. I've got a true story to tell now.
And the tiny caption reads,
The end.
Well done, Fred. Superb.
That was great. Good fun. Nothing like interfering with other cultures.
Absolutely. We encourage you to do that at any given opportunity, listeners, don't we, Peter?
Very un-Star Trek Prime Directive, yes.
No, it was cool. I mean, it's an interesting one because there's nothing to say that the government in charge weren't benevolent.
Mm-hmm.
We're just assuming that the government is nice.
Yeah.
To its subjects.
I'm very impressed with Fred. I'll be honest, he's quite the skilled man because obviously he learns the language within a couple of days. Also, he's writing in a different language on the wall of the president's office to tell him about the conspiracy. It's not English he's writing in. In these stories, usually everyone speaks English and all the writing's English. And that Johnny Storm story we did recently, Johnny was doing a skywriting in English.
So he
everyone
was.
Went, oh, look, pointing up. But this actually addresses it because he is writing in. You can see it's not hugely clear, but you can see that it's definitely not English. It's strange shapes, but obviously understanding what he's writing. It's quite the Renaissance man.
It almost looks like he's just drawing, mathematical equations on a blackboard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's not crystal clear exactly what he's doing, but yeah, the other lads can make it out.
This story came out in September 56, okay? Now, that was almost exactly 2 years before the debut of Adam Strange. And the similarities in the costumes are astounding. I know you also said it looks like Ted Knight Starman, but the cross, bandolier,
Yes.
and the holster,
Yeah.
and the style of the gun.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very much a precursor, I think, to the Adam Strange.
Yeah, especially in the cover, it looks much more like Adam, I think, than inside.
Uh-huh.
It's the shape of the cowl, which you see in quite a lot of close-ups, which makes the Ted Knight sort of similarity quite clear. But you're right, it's entirely possible that whenever they were coming up with Adam Strange, that went, oh, wait a minute, here's a good design from something a couple of years ago. They tweaked it slightly, changed the colouring, but no, it's... What we really need now, of course, is that when you and I write our own DC comic, Ted Knight visits Adam Strange on Earth-1, and they have to go out to this rocky area because that's where the Zeta Beam's going to strike, and the Zeta Beam opens up the cave, and through a whole horrible set of circumstances, Ted Knight and Adam Strange end up in this other dimension, and when it's reprinted in black and white, no one has a clue who anyone is.
Have you been replaced by Roy Thomas?
Yes.
That's possibly the most Roy Thomas sentence you've ever said.
Really? Goodness me. Gosh, apart from our man's brilliant, isn't he? Yeah. I like when Fred manages to sort of extrapolate so much of it about that he's in another dimension rather than being transported to another world.
Yeah.
Your skepticism as you read the line, the gigantic lightning flash. So, so Fred, obviously, he must be quite scientifically clued in if he's able to work out that other dimensional portals and caves are caused by being struck by lightning.
Yeah, well, that is something that we've mentioned several times.
I thought you were about to say that's certainly things we've encountered in real life.
No, it's certainly stuff that we have encountered in stories, mostly right back at the start of the podcast.
That's right, yeah, the Batman one.
Yeah, and there was Lois Lane as well, flying the kite, getting struck by lightning.
Of course.
Yeah, there was that as well. Yeah, lightning definitely is something that apparently can cause interdimensional gateways.
Or travel. Yeah. Interesting. While we're here, I'll quickly mention again a story from issue 170 of Strange Adventures, which I feel sure that Grant Morrison must have read when he was doing preparation for Animal Man. That also has representation of issues of Strange Adventures and a creature coming to life out of the story and all that sort of thing. And it's very, very meta and very trippy. I would encourage anyone listening to track down a copy of Strange Adventures 170. It's a fascinating story, especially if you consider, as I say, Grant's Animal Man. So, listeners, one of the reasons we did this story, obviously, was because it was quite short and it involved other dimensions, and it gives Peter an easier editing week before we finally get to the 1975 JLA-JSA crossover, which is going to involve a lot of talking for both of us and maybe a few treats and surprises.
Yep.
But, interestingly, this one, as a little curtain raiser, as a precursor, obviously it features a writer travelling to another dimension. And if that's not a broad hint or a good sense of why we did it, then I can't help you. So, Peter, what should people do if they have thoughts about travelling to other dimensions via lightning strikes or their thoughts on issues of Strange Adventures?
You can email us at theearth2podcast@gmail.com. Make sure you follow us on social media because we'll be putting up some lovely bonus material for this and indeed every episode. On Facebook and Instagram, we're at the Earth 2 Podcast, and on Twitter, we're at podcast_Earth2, and it is the number 2 for all of our socials.
It certainly is. Now, we have to say a quick hello to Colin and Debbie, who we were talking to yesterday. Thank them for listening, for their support. And we're also going to mention the upcoming JS April event, which we're delighted to see that our pal, Mr. Irredeemable Matthews, has invited us to take part in. So we'll be giving you some more details on that nearer the time. Start checking the socials using the hashtag JSApril. But as I always say at this point, if you're enjoying the show, please consider going to wherever it is you receive your podcasts and giving us a positive review, or visiting our coffee page and bugging Peter some cash to pay for all the coffee he drinks whilst he edits my fluffs and edits out all the time I called today's protagonist Ted instead of Fred, which was a few.
Stay tuned, they might be in the outtake.
Who can say? On that bombshell,
I've been Peter.
And I've been David, and we'll see you next week on
the Earth 2 Podcast.
Transmatter cube activated. Return coordinates set for Earth Prime.
And as all this is going on, Ted is thinking, and we see Ted's POV through the frame of the glasses.
Fred.
Yes, and very helpfully, Ted phasing through the wall in a Kitty Pryde style. Very interesting. Ted's Yes, and we see Ted's... Oh, hang on, I just said it again. Ted thinks to him... And for the final panel of the story, back at Ted's... Got his name wrong again.